Within First Nation communities, there's schools, health centers, band offices, and the concern is whether or not they work together, for one response.
Tonight, how Indigenous communities are preparing for COVID-19 in Canada.
There are many lives to remember, and there is much love that we need to provide to each other in this working group.
And the Alberta government forms an MMIWG working group. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. COVID-19, or the coronavirus as it's most commonly known, has been gripping world and national headlines for the past few months. The World Health Organization confirmed as of today there are more than 98,000 reported cases globally and 3,380 deaths. In Canada, the threat is relatively low with 51 confirmed and presumptive cases reported. Brittany Hobson gives us a glimpse of what Indigenous communities are doing to address the epidemic.
In the wake of COVID-19 spreading to Canada, Nunavut's Department of Health has developed protocols to confirm if someone has the virus.
When an individual presents to a health center or a health facility within Nunavut and there's a possibility that they have this new virus, the healthcare providers contact the public health officer on call, and there's a discussion about whether or not they need to be tested, and that's based on a risk assessment.
Dr. Michael Patterson is the Chief Public Health Officer for the territory. He says a handful of people have been tested, but all came back negative. The World Health Organization says the disease is spread through coughing or sneezing and typically involves close face-to-face contact. Many Indigenous communities deal with overcrowding in the home, which could be cause for concern.
This is not just a Department of Health response, that because of the implications and the concerns and the fears in the general public, and because of the impact that COVID has had in other jurisdictions, we're, as every other or most other jurisdictions in Canada, we're moving to more of a whole of government response.
As of Friday, March 6th, there are 51 confirmed and presumptive cases in Canada, with the majority in British Columbia and Ontario. A team from Winnipeg was recently awarded a grant to study countermeasures to pandemics and how they relate to Indigenous communities. The group hopes to work with communities to develop effective and culturally appropriate measures.
Within First Nation communities, there's schools, health centers, band offices, and the concern is whether or not they work together, for one response.
This week, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau created a cabinet committee on COVID-19. The 8-person group is working with the Public Health Agency of Canada to prepare for the health and economic impacts of the virus.
We can anticipate that there will be an outbreak in one of our Canadian communities. I think this is, as I said, a virus that knows no borders and that is growing, and we're seeing an increasing, each day there are countries that have new cases and new outbreaks and new situations. Obviously, we're working very diligently together with provinces and territories to prevent that from happening, but the reality is this is an evolving situation.
Several Indigenous organizations are also looking to do their part. The Manitoba Métis Federation is currently developing its own strategy to combat a potential outbreak. In a release, Minister of Health and Wellness Francis Chartrand said, "Our citizens often have difficulty navigating and accessing the healthcare system at the best of times. I want to ensure they have the information and tools to properly manage a potential outbreak of this deadly virus." The Assembly of First Nations developed a fact sheet and distributed it to communities. Common preventative measures include washing your hands regularly and staying home while sick. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
It's been 4 years and counting as Inuit leaders and federal cabinet ministers once again attended their annual meeting. The Prime Minister, Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller, and Infrastructure Minister Catherine McKenna face their Inuit counterparts. The Inuit Crown Partnership reviews progress, sets priorities for the year. In the past, co-development on improving Inuit education and housing has highlighted meetings.
We have a number of accomplishments over the past year, even in an electoral cycle, especially in relation to the federal budget and the Inuit section within the Indigenous chapter of the budget, which has allowed for Inuit self-determination in the way in which federal funds flow into Inuit Nunavut communities.
I know we'll have a chance to discuss Inuit land claims, as well as economic development, procurement, and various legislative priorities. We'll also be discussing the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and a meaningful shared way forward on the calls for justice and the National Action Plan.
The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project has cleared another legal hurdle. That's because the Supreme Court of Canada has declined to hear legal challenges from 5 Indigenous and environmental groups opposed to the pipeline expansion. The groups wanted the top court to consider if the federal government violated the Species at Risk Act when it approved the pipeline expansion a second time in June 2019. They argued the project would harm endangered southern killer whales. But there are still more challenges that could be heard by the court, especially over consultation.
This is essentially the end of the legal line for the arguments around statutory compliance, as well as conflict and bias by the decision makers, which was Cabinet. There still remains the opportunity to appeal the recent Coldwater decision, which was about consultation, and we heard today from both Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations that they do intend to appeal that decision to the Supreme Court of Canada.
The Ontario NDP is calling on the Doug Ford government to do better on mental health services for children and youth. Thunder Bay MPP Judith Monteith-Farrell says 28,000 children and youth across the province are on wait lists for counseling and treatment services. At a press conference today, she said Bill 63 would ensure youth under 26 would not have to wait longer than 30 days for services. More than 200 kids are waiting for counseling and treatment services at the Thunder Bay Children's Centre. It's where Tessa Fiddler has received support for 2 of her children.
It ended up that with my oldest child, it was the option that we were given, was that he would have to leave the community to get the help he needed. And we said that that wasn't an option. I am not sure if the government fully understands the geographic vastness of the far north. If they, realistically, are they going to be able to provide adequate and equitable access to children in the north? I'm not sure, but I have to be hopeful.
Still in Thunder Bay, police there say they've made a small dent in the city's gang activity coming from southern Ontario. But they also warn it's a growing problem that isn't going away soon. Project Trapper was 3 months of work by a joint task force that included Thunder Bay Police, Ontario Provincial Police, and 2 First Nations police services. At a press conference today, police said they made 46 arrests and laid 119 criminal charges between November and February. They seized drugs worth a street value of more than $270,000 and another $131,000 in cash. 15 of the 32 accused are from Toronto area street gangs.
This drug activity is taking over in communities. It's strong, it's here, and it's very, very difficult to get rid of. The drugs are cheap, they can be manufactured quickly, they can be sold and quickly out on any community within this province. The drugs activities, especially with Thunder Bay, they're coming through here. They're being, for example, used here as a center so that they can be dispersed in other areas up north, for example. Fly-in reserves, they can be put on airplanes. People can be taking them up. Ice roads are an access during the winters. So it is a hot issue here, also in the smaller communities up north and around us.
Still to come, we'll check in on a number of the actions taking place in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chiefs who are opposed to the Coastal GasLink natural gas pipeline. Stay with us. Here's a look at Saturday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. -6 with flurries for Halifax, -5 in Charlottetown, 11 below in Nain, 6 below for Happy Valley, Goose Bay, 0 under sunny skies in Montreal, -6 in Chibougamau, +5 in Toronto, Sarnia, and Windsor, +6 for Thunder Bay, 4 above in Sioux Lookout, -13 in Churchill, +1 with snow for Norway House, 3 above in Winnipeg and Gimli, +1 for Brandon, +5 in Regina, 6 above with flurries for Saskatoon, -10 in Meadow Lake, 16 below in La Ronge. Welcome back. Saskatchewan RCMP are investigating one of their officers who posted on social media comments saying Indigenous protesters blocking railways should be shot. APTN's Priscilla Wolf has details.
On March 2nd, an RCMP officer posted a rant about Indigenous protesters, then used a meme to say the protesters should be machine gunned down. The RCMP issued a written statement stating they are aware of the comments and are doing an internal investigation. The officer has been put on desk duty during the investigation. The Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations say they forwarded the screenshots of the comments to the RCMP when they were made aware of them. Vice Chief Dutch Leroy says,
"Certainly it is concerning that a member of the National Police Force would hold and promote reprehensible views on a social media platform. The FSIN acknowledged that there are many professional men and women within the RCMP, but from time to time, we hear of individuals whose mindset is not consistent with the RCMP's vision. This is a matter of concern as he is an individual with the authority to enforce the law. It creates suspicion on how he may view and interact with our First Nations citizens."
Darlene Okamason-Sakot says as an Indigenous woman who lives in Saskatchewan, it concerns her to have a member of the RCMP making derogatory comments online about Indigenous people, and that the RCMP commissioner should speak up.
I think the RCMP commissioner, Brenda Lukey, really needs to kind of make some kind of a statement or some kind of reassurance to the general public that she's watching these behaviors from the RCMP in each province, and to kind of touch base with their attorney generals, their lieutenant generals, to talk about how to kind of smooth that over and reassure the general public that they're following protocols.
Vice Chief Dutch Leroy says the Federation of Indigenous Sovereign Nations is willing to work with the RCMP to help race relations.
And I want to encourage the RCMP to include the FSIN in reviewing and revising their cultural competency training, not only here in Saskatchewan, but all divisions within Canada, including Depot Division at Regina. Depot Division, after all, is the training facility of RCMP cadets, and all cadets should undergo enhanced cultural sensitivity.
Priscilla Wolf, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Well, it was a significantly calmer day at the recently relocated Wet'suwet'en Solidarity Camp in Ganawage Mohawk Territory, just south of Montreal. After moving to a more visible green space near the base of the Mercier Bridge on Thursday afternoon, a handful of remaining firekeepers watched from a distance as a first Canadian Pacific freight train made its way through the community late Friday morning. Though the Ganawage rail blockade has ended, participants say their support will continue. Now to Caledonia, Ontario, where one of the lesser-known Wet'suwet'en Solidarity blockades has no end in sight. Elena McDougall has this update from Six Nations territory.
If things seem quiet here at the Wet'suwet'en Solidarity blockade of Highway 6 in Caledonia, it's because it is quiet. Update from the OPP today says that to date, there have been no incidents associated with the blockade, and they've consistently described it as peaceful since February 24th when it was first constructed. A cement barrier has been installed on the opposite end of Highway 6 here, and the OPP say that there are concerns about developing weather conditions, and as always, their job is to protect the safety of both land defenders and people traveling through the area. The spokespeople for this particular demonstration are not available today, as a terrible tragedy has occurred within the community that has demanded their attention. There's, apart from that, I reached out to the mayor of Haldeman County and Ward 3 councillor Dan Lawrence, who is the councillor for this ward here, but I didn't hear back from them before my deadline today. So I guess the update here is that, as the land defenders said previously, they will remain until the respectful demands of Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs have been met and respectful dialogue has taken place between them and the federal government and representatives of the Crown. Elena McDougall, APTN National News, Caledonia.
The Winnipeg Police Service is changing its approach to murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls matters. The new design will see coordination of resources between various departments. The Winnipeg Police will continue to help RCMP with Project Devote, which is a joint task force between City Police and the RCMP, but will no longer designate investigators to the project. Winnipeg Police will be adding a designated family liaison position to assist investigators and families in communicating. The reorganization is said to be a positive step to helping police find the right people to investigate the cases.
Your approach on investigating a missing person is much different than investigating a homicide. So knowing when to transition, just having people in the room, in the same space, to be able to share information will give us the flexibility to more rapidly transition when we need to.
Meanwhile, the Alberta government wants to find ways to reduce the number of incidents of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in the province. To do so, they are teaming up with mostly female Indigenous leaders to form a working group to find solutions. Chris Stewart has that story.
The Alberta Minister of Indigenous Relations was emotional when announcing a new working group to help implement the recommendations from the National Inquiry into those that are missing or murdered.
This is a tragedy that keeps happening. Just a few weeks ago, a young Indigenous woman, a loved family member, had her life taken in a downtown parking lot. We must remember that Indigenous women are central to their families, culture, and communities. They're respected as life givers, caregivers, teachers, and healers, and it's well past time to make our province a safer place for them.
Statistics Canada data shows Alberta has the highest rate of homicide for Indigenous women in Canada. To try to deal with the issue, leaders like Lisa Haggerty, Rochelle Venn, and Josie Nipinak, who is the executive director of the Wotan Healing Lodge Society, a place for domestic abuse victims, will be joined by Alberta MLAs to find solutions to reduce violence towards missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls.
No one said that this is going to be an easy task. I think we're going to go through lots of boxes of Kleenex for one. There are many stories to tell. There are many lives to remember. And there is much love that we need to provide to each other in this working group.
NDP Indigenous Affairs critic Richard Feehan noted the government's reduction of spending on other Indigenous initiatives. He says he supports the new group.
This gives me some hope, and I certainly will do everything I can to make sure it's successful, offering my support rather than criticism.
Very, very pleased that the government is taking action on this issue, and I believe that it's been part of the movement going forward in terms of looking at the issues that are important to Albertans, and so this is very, very significant for Indigenous women.
The group has already had their first meeting. Minister Wilson noted he added $200,000 for the group's first year. He says the group has no time frame to stop. Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Coming up, a long-standing land claim has been resolved. Details after the break. Here's the rest of Saturday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. Minus 11 in Grand Prairie, 14 below for Fort McMurray, 0 with snow in Medicine Hat, plus 11 in snow in Calgary, plus 6 with showers for Vancouver, plus 4 in Kamloops, 2 above under sunny skies in Smithers, minus 6 for Dease Lake, minus 26 in Old Crow, 7 below for Whitehorse, minus 14 in Fort Simpson, Trout Lake, and Fort Liard. 26 below is the high for Sachs Harbor, minus 23 in Colville Lake, minus 37 is your high in Cambridge Bay, 35 below in Baker Lake, minus 38 in Resolute, 37 below in Joe Haven. Welcome back. A long-standing land dispute has been settled in Akwesasne that will see the Mohawk community receive $240 million as part of a land claim filed in 1981. The claim area includes the Quebec municipality of Dundee, east of Akwesasne Reserve lands. Akwesasne Mohawk Council Grand Chief Abram Benedict says the agreement will help the community improve infrastructure and reclaim over 18,000 acres of land.
We can now begin the process with the proceeds of looking at how we will purchase lands off of the reserve to make them become part of the reserve. We can look at what some opportunities may be for, some community future development. But in the immediate, we will begin a comprehensive process to consult with the community on the full length or the full use of the proceeds.
Well, that is your APTN National News for this Friday. For more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca, and stay up to date with the latest by downloading the APTN News app. And tune in tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Time for APTN National News Weekend. Stick around. APTN Investigates is up next. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend.